All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What does a Hollywood woman, a woman with a voice literally heard round the world, do with her opportunity to promote legal reform in the wake of a sexual misconduct scandal that has rocked her professional community? Woohoo! Twitter tantrum! In the wake of the Harvey Weinstein scandal and the subsequent exposure of other Hollywood and media sexual misconduct, feminists had the perfect opportunity for activism. They could have fought for reform to address the ways in which Weinstein was able to silence his victims and the targets of his misconduct. Weinstein was able to bribe law enforcement to prevent prosecution when he was caught in an illegal act. He was able to exert pressure on mainstream establishment media to refrain from publishing embarrassing articles exposing his behavior. He was able to blacklist anyone who sought recourse against him, or anyone who attempted to hold him accountable for his actions. Last but not least, he was able to use that combination to strong-arm anyone he had wronged into signing paperwork ranging from non-disclosure agreements that amounted to promises to cover up a crime, to affidavits stating their original allegations were false. Any other kind of contract or similar paperwork would be invalidated by proof of coercion. Does California law not contain such a determination? If so, it should. Any contract which bars an employee from reporting a crime committed against them to authorities and bars them from testifying about that crime should be invalid. And certainly no employer should be able to require an employee to sign any legally binding agreement to cover up the employer's criminal acts. If no law dictates those conditions, that's another area where reform is badly needed. Bribery of public officials is already illegal. A lawyer shouldn't be able to donate to the campaign fund of a DA who is investigating his client on a criminal charge. A DA should be legally required to recuse him or herself from the investigation if a criminal charge is made against one of his or her donors, or a donor's client. These are clear conflicts of interest. What fail-safes does California have in its laws to prevent bribery or conflict of interest from impacting the justice system? Is that another area where there could be reform sought, or where these outspoken victims could be pushing for proper enforcement? Perhaps more of Weinstein's victims would have been in a position to fight him on a legal and social front if there hadn't been laws barring them from recording their encounters with him, a key type of evidence in situations like this. Are California's laws on recording one's own conversations with others standing in the way of victims' abilities to document crimes committed against them? Perhaps this is another area where reform is needed. Hollywood's outspoken Weinstein accusers should be fighting for reforms like these. The dismantling of whatever legal environment allows a studio executive or other powerful employer to buy cops and prosecutors, silence media, and coerce crime victims into agreeing to help cover up crimes that have been committed against them or crimes they witnessed their employer committing. What did these accusers, with a platform basically handed to them by the situation, choose to do instead? Why, they engaged in a massive slactivism campaign, of course. Within days after the Weinstein scandal broke, Twitter hashtags Women Boycott Twitter and Me Too erupted in sequence for the purported goal of encouraging discussion on sexual violence, including support for victims speaking up. Hashtag Women Boycott Twitter was feminism's response to seeing the rules that feminist groups like Women Action Media had pressured the company to adopt applied to one of their own. Rose McGowan's account was suspended for 12 hours because she published another individual's private phone number, a blatant violation of Twitter's terms of service. The tantrum burned hot and long, with Twitter feminists attempting to excuse McGowan's behavior and demanding double standards in Twitter's application of its rules. However, Instead of an actual boycott, enough people tweeted to the hashtag that it trended all day, followed by a resurrection of hashtag Amplify Women by twits who realized that the boycott hashtag trending indicated that women were not actually boycotting Twitter. Yeah, you heard that right. Feminists post-Weinstein activism was tweeting to hashtag Amplify Women on a feminist-run platform to complain that women are silenced because hashtag Women Boycott Twitter flopped when the women of Twitter failed to, in fact, boycott. As a result of that massive tantrum, Twitter's cucked executive officer, Jack, promised to do better about maintaining the double standard feminists want in Twitter's terms of service enforcement. As the boycott fiasco was unfolding, hashtag MeToo was initiated by Alyssa Milano. Milano asked victims to tweet about their experiences. The purported goal was to provide some indication of the prevalence of sexual violence in overall society as a launching pad for discussing sexual violence as a social issue. Instead, many women and feminists of both sexes revealed rather quickly that the so-called discussion was really all about petty victim signaling and demonizing men in general as sexual predators. This was shown by numerous women posting to complain about being catcalled, while responding with shushing and resentment against male victims of female perpetrators posting in hashtag MeToo, as well as to the introduction of false incidents as a reminder that in terms of law and policy, assessment of accusations should be based on evidence. Suddenly, the hashtag wasn't started for the purpose of discussing the issue, but as a means of showcasing only female victims of only male perpetrators to demonstrate that they are the biggest victim set, and to provide an excuse to demonize not just perpetrators, but all men. If nothing else, that was demonstrated by feminists' failure to understand the expression of compassion, consideration, and concern for strangers by relating one's connection with them to one's connection with loved ones. Rather than noting this as a human response to the plight of others, feminists painted such expression coming from men as an inability to see women as human, thereby revealing their own inability to see men as human beings who have human responses to human suffering. If the vitriol dumped on male victims posting to hashtag MeToo and later hashtag HimToo was not enough to show feminism's hate, the emergence of hashtag HimThough, a straight-up assault on the principle of due process and the related standards for evidence, drove it home in no uncertain terms. That tag was started for the purpose of condemning failure to automatically believe women who accuse men of sexual misconduct and act on such accusations without hesitation or question. And they really do only care when they can wave the female victim flag. These wailing women also had the chance to help other sexual assault victims. The tantrum hashtags trended in part because of who was driving them, and in part because they happened in an environment of people already prepared to listen in the wake of the Harvey Weinstein scandal. Had those celebrities who were driving the Women Boycott Twitter hashtag and hashtag MeToo chosen to do so, they could have helped to spread awareness of the child sex abuse problem in Hollywood, which was exposed by the documentary An Open Secret. This is, in its own way, connected. These types of misconduct are often committed by individuals who themselves were victimized in their youth, and the same legal and social environment enables both. And yes, we are talking about victimized children here, something that should have gotten their attention, at least according to feminist excuses for maintaining the maternal custody pattern in family court. If women really are more nurturing, should these women not have jumped at the opportunity to stop the victimization of children in their own work community? Here was another opportunity for compelling activism. There are some serious questions that need addressed with regard to how Hollywood does business with children. Among other things, the documentary exposed the practice of having a judge emancipate children from their parents to go live with their manager to facilitate their ability to work. This brings the question, what judge did this without question, and without some fail-safe in place to protect those children from exploitation? An Open Secret has been out for 3 years. These Hollywood women, so poised to be outraged over sexual abuse, should have been promoting it and taking inspiration from it for initiatives to achieve industry reform. Instead, the film sat quietly for 3 years, and when the documentary became publicly available free of charge and hashtag them too was chosen to promote it, There was immediate radio silence from outraged feminists and their supporters. First, they ignored it. Then they hijacked the hashtag to post repeats of already discredited accusations against President Trump. You heard that right. Faced with an opportunity to do even the slightest bit of slactivism on behalf of sexually exploited boys, feminists and their supporters shoved the kids aside and substituted even less effective slactivism against an uninvolved elected official. Feminists do not want to have a frank and open discussion on sexual misconduct, its impact, how to address it with a focus on prevention and victim recovery, and where false accusations fall into that discussion. They really don't want to discuss the role of proper investigation and due process in addressing sexual misconduct. And they don't want to acknowledge that it's not the strictly gendered issue they've made it out to be. They want to publicly wallow in outrage, to create excuses to generalize, and to use proxy victim status as a launching pad for their elites to push for more attacks on due process rights for the purported but not actual benefit of women. Hello and welcome to HBR Talk. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Woozle Slayer Karen Strawn, that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, and as always, the supreme doge in charge, Brian Martinez. We'd like to talk to you about a big role in our next production if you'll just come up to our office for a late night interview. You're okay with that, aren't you? I hope you don't mind a few, leading questions. And you'd better bring a pillow to bite, my pretties, 'cause we're going in dry. But it's all good if we yell surprise, isn't it? And if not, what are you going to do about it? Start another Twitter hashtag? Oh, and I can't hear my co-host. Hang on a second.
We've had hashtag yes all women. We've had hashtag not all men. We've had hashtag everyday sexism. We've had hashtag I'm just listen and believe, or hashtag believe her. We've had all of these hashtags, and they all amount to the same fucking thing, right? Which is women are the only victims who are worthy of having a public discussion, and the discussion is going to center more around isolating men as perpetrators than it is about prevention or treatment for victims, or how do you deal with things. It's all about presenting men as perpetrators and then trying to, as we're doing in Canada right now, fiddle with the justice system in order to make it as easy as possible to convict men who are accused of sexual assault. So yeah.
Well, you notice how they always say, "Oh, can men stop trying to take over the conversation for once?" Like there was that one tweet in the intro video.
For once, yeah. No, like men have only just joined the conversation on this stuff.
Yeah. And yet, no, it's not like men started all those other hashtag campaigns like believe her and yes all women. I'm pretty sure women have had a pretty sizable chance to talk about these issues, and surprisingly enough, like you said, the Twitter campaigns don't really seem to be doing anything. Who knew?
Well, I think honestly, if we were to, as MRAs, start hashtags like not my gold digger, okay, or hashtag babies are not for dumpsters, right? Okay, things like that, right? That you can argue that, okay, maybe there are some men who are gold diggers and some men who abandon their babies or put babies in trash bags and get rid of them, right? But most of the time, that's women doing that. Okay, so we can make these targeted hashtags, and then let's just sit back, okay, let's just sit back and wait for all of the women coming in, all of the feminists coming in saying, not all women, you're unfairly stereotyping, you know, you're generalizing, this is not fair, this is not a common behavior, this is not something that, you know, you're acting like all women do this when, you know, not all women do this. Very few women do this, right? So, I mean, like, honestly, if we started a hashtag campaign similar to these things with this kind of focus, and then we exclude men from the conversation when they come in and say, it seems to me like you're actually trying to paint all men with a broad brush, right? You're blaming this on whiteness and maleness or whatever, or white maleness or whatever the hell it is, right? This Weinstein thing. I'm reading articles in mainstream papers attaching this to the concept of white masculinity, right? As opposed to like this one perpetrator and a small cohort of similar men. Okay. So I'm feeling a little put upon here. I'm feeling a little vilified. Oh, well, you know, but at least you weren't sexually assaulted. How dare you complain? You know, when you've been sexually assaulted, then come back and complain. Right. And then he says, well, I was sexually assaulted by a woman. And they're like, oh, you're just making the conversation all about you. Can you please not do that? You're derailing. And it's just like, it's infuriating. It really is a lot like those conversations Allison had on Twitter. And I actually was doing a podcast this afternoon with Matt Orchard in New Zealand, a second one. And I mentioned Allison's experience on Twitter where, you know, somebody says women in the Middle East are oppressed in this way. And Allison comes in and says, yeah, and men in the Middle East are oppressed in these ways. And then the person who started that conversation comes in and says, why are you defending Sharia? Why are you defending that culture? Why are you defending all of that? And she's like, I just let you know that there were twice as many victims of this particular culture as you had originally thought. And somehow you interpret that as me defending that culture.
Yeah, that's quite a leap of logic. What
the hell is wrong with you? And when she puts it that way, they don't really have a whole lot of recourse to come back. And because that's like the showstopper. That's the I told you there were twice as many victims of that culture, and you came back and accused me of defending that culture. Why would you have assumed that that's what I was doing?
Yeah, no kidding. Actually, it's funny that you should mention how we should start our own campaigns, because I had the darndest thing happen with a friend of mine last week. It was a massive argument over this whole thing. But basically, I was just saying, you know, you don't have to tell, if you don't feel like you have to tell your husband or any other men in your life that you care about, that you think that he needs to be better, then you don't need to tell all men in the world that they need to be better. That's really not your business. Like, you didn't get the one single good man in the world and all of the other men are toxic and horrible. And basically, I'll spare you the details of the big long argument, but it ended with me saying, I don't say that all men need to be better because some men are rapists, for the same reason that I don't say that all women need to be better because a lot of women are child abusers. And that was kind of my point. The point was basically, we don't need to chastise all of one single group because some people are assholes. But then they responded with, you know, yes, we should have a talk about all women being better if more women than men are child abusers. Why shouldn't we? And it's like, because that's horrible. Why would we start having this conversation about all people in a general population if not all of them are doing that thing? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, one of the things too is that I think that when MRAs and anti-feminists come up, you know, because feminists present child abuse as gendered, male perpetrated. You know, it's family violence in general is male perpetrated in their eyes. Violence in general is male perpetrated in their eyes. It's a male problem. Name the problem. It's masculinity. So when you come in with the stats on child abuse and you say, well, okay, but here's the thing, the majority of child abusers, dogs, stop it! The majority of cases of child maltreatment are women abusing their children. You know, and fathers are less likely to do that. They say, well, why are you making it all about women? And it's like, why are you making it all? No, we're trying to ungender these issues, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We are trying to actually take a holistic approach, because the vast majority of family violence is not based on patriarchy. It's not based on the socioeconomic, sociopolitical positions of men and women. It's not based on normative patriarchal cultural values, right? It's so normative, right, for men to hit their wives, for people to think it's okay for men to hit their wives to keep them in line. That is such a normative belief that 3 times as many people in the US believe they've been abducted by aliens. That's how normative patriarchal terrorism is.
Oh, and
in terms of cultural attitudes.
It's been normal for so long that at the beginning of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century, judges were talking about bringing back, not just starting, but bringing back the whipping post for men who beat their wives. Now, they didn't have any kind of punishment for women who hit their husbands.
Well, some jurisdictions did, but
not like that. Not like that at all. Mostly, you saw men getting told to get their wives under control if their wives were beating them, as if, you know, that the fact that their wives were hitting them was not a sign that they couldn't do that because their wives were mean. But this is something that, you know, I've been watching this discussion for quite some time between our group, basically the men's rights movement, and feminists on this, and the wiggling that takes place in these conversations, right? They bring up statistics that they have garnered based on ignoring factors that are significant factors in relation to these issues. And when you even things out by bringing up the statistics that you get when you look at the big picture, you look at all of the factors involved, then they want to eliminate things. Oh, well, you know, in terms of sexual violence, we want to use the set of statistics that we think we shouldn't be using in terms, or the other way around, in terms of violence against men, we want to use statistics that we think we shouldn't be using when we're talking about violence against women, because when we're talking about violence against women, we're going to say these statistics excludes the violence. But it's okay to use those statistics when we're talking about violence against men, because we want to exclude those statistics. And they do that with in terms of reporting versus overall reporting, like versus reporting to police versus conviction rate. And for them, the conviction rate isn't enough when you're talking about violence against women. But if you go beyond the conviction rate when you're talking about violence against men, you're making things up. And it's that way with every area of crime against men that they want to consider to be a gendered crime against women. And then the minute that you start talking about it, it doesn't matter if there was a conversation going on about that type of violence against women or not. You're interrupting the conversation. And that was what I saw with respect to this. #MenToo actually predates all of these other hashtags that started after the Weinstein scandal. And it predates it by quite some time. It wasn't started a few days before, a few months before. It was a couple of years old. And that discussion had been taking place for quite a while. So when #MeToo started and victims of both sexes started posting about perpetrators of both sexes, and feminists jumped on anybody posting male victim stories or female perpetrator stories. This isn't about you. This discussion isn't about you. It's about this specific narrow situation we want everybody to see as the biggest problem. And the only way we can get people to see it as the biggest problem is if you shut up and let us only talk about this thing, which indicates obviously that it's not the biggest problem. As soon as that happened, they started going over to #MenToo. Many of these feminists started acting as though that hashtag was created as an interruption. As if the hashtag that had predated the hashtag they were booting men out of, that was supposed to be an inclusive hashtag, they turn around and, oh, you're interrupting us with this hashtag that isn't part. It'd be like, all right, well, we're going to go down the street to the bar to have our conversation. You can have the town hall over here. And we're just all going to head down here and have our conversation down the street at the bar. How dare you go talk at the bar? You're talking over us. We can't hear ourselves think at the town hall because we know you're down the street at that bar having a conversation without us. You know, that's as much sense as that made.
Well, and they're always saying, you know, oh, go do your own thing. You know, if you piggyback off of our campaigns, clearly it doesn't matter that much to you because it's all about interrupting women. And yet when men try to have their own get-togethers or days or anything else like that, they go and pull the fire extinguisher or the fire alarm on them, or they petition the universities to have the men's days shut down. You know, it doesn't matter if these guys want to have these days to themselves, if they want to bring attention to their own details. Somehow, they always seem to find a way to shut it down. Anyway.
I think too, you know, like when it is actually, I mean, it is sometimes necessary, in my opinion, to not disrupt feminist events, but to show up at feminist events, stand way off to the side, and hand out some literature to people who seem interested, like I did with Nick Redding at the Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event a few years ago, right? We just stood quietly off to the side with our little sandwich board that said Men's Rights Edmonton, and people were curious. They approached us, and when they approached us, we would chat with them and say, well, we're here to provide additional information about other victims of domestic violence, right? Because this event only deals with female victims and male perpetrators, but there are other victims, there are other perpetrators. And so here's some information that you can look at. And the hostility, even though we weren't disrupting anything, even though we were like way off on the edges, even though we only spoke to people who approached us and asked us what our deal was, all of those things, no matter how well behaved we were, right? The organizers of that event were pissed at us. Other than there was one man who was an organizer there, and I spoke to him, and he actually seemed to consider what I said. And what I said to him was, it really doesn't matter whether a child is watching his dad beat up his mom, or his mom beat up his dad, or both of them beat up each other. He's learning one lesson, and that's that conflict is best resolved by violence. And he's also learning that his home is not a secure place for him to exist in. And so I think I got through to him, at least in terms of, you know, he sort of was like, okay, that's food for thought. But there were women there. One of them was so offended by us. She was in an organizer t-shirt, and she came up to us and, you know, she looked at our sandwich board and she said, men's rights, men already have too many rights. And Nick, of course, he's got a handful of pamphlets, and he leans forward and starts to gesture with them in a very gallant way. It was almost like a courtly bow. And he leans forward and he says, actually, and of course, he's presenting these pamphlets. She grabs a whole bunch of them out of his hands. She yells, give me those. And she just runs off. And he looks at me and I look at him, and we're like, what the hell just happened here? This is just bizarre. Like, these women are lunatics. So essentially, I do think, because so many of these initiatives and these events and all of, like, I'm not saying men's rights activists need to go crash these events. Men's rights activists would do well if they can remain calm and measured and reasonable and rational, to stand at the verges of these events and hand out additional, don't even call it counter literature, call it additional information, right? To people who are interested in these kinds of issues, because there were lots of people who were interested in the Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event, who were very interested in what we had to say, and who took all of our literature and were like, yeah, no, this is, yeah, no, I know a lot of men who have been in exactly this position and they really couldn't find any help, right? So essentially, I think that, but that's not derailing the conversation. That's not like storming up on stage. That's not like standing up in the middle of a speech and starting to scream and smear red paint all over your face and, you know, and things like that. It's not blowing air horns. It's not being an asshole. It's just doing what you need to do to counter the false narrative that's being presented at these events.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it shouldn't be seen as a counter protest or anything like that. It's just, you know, sure, women's domestic violence, women's abuse, those are terrible issues. But we also have to acknowledge that it goes the other way, too. And that shouldn't be seen as a bad thing. And yet so many people react like the woman in your story reacted. And it just doesn't make sense. They take it as like a personal insult towards themselves that you're like, oh yeah, well, you know, I happen to know a guy that went through that same thing. No, that's terrible. The spotlight needs to be on me.
Yeah, I'm gonna interrupt this to read well, we have one super chat. Wolfie Muzzle says, oh, that's cute. Wolfie Muzzle sent us $2 and said, you guys are a breath of fresh air. Keep it up. And I wanted to point out also that remaining calm and staying at the edges of the event would put us several steps, not just one step or two steps, but several steps above what feminists do at men's rights events. So it's when Karen talks about doing something like this, we're not talking as a group, we're not talking about doing anything that is necessarily a bad thing, and we're not talking about interrupting or imposing or anything. You're allowed to do that at the polls. You're allowed to stand off so many feet away at the voting polls, you know, during an election, and offer literature and without actually accosting anybody. And you can tell which groups are the rational groups when you go to vote and you're walking up to the polls and you've got some people off to the side offering literature and just standing there with pamphlets and signs and stuff, and then you've got other people flat out walking out into your path, getting into your way, doing everything short of grabbing you to yell in your face about their issue. And a lot of times that can make the difference for people in whether or not they are willing to listen. It doesn't persuade them to your side. It doesn't make them automatically think you're right or wrong. But nobody wants to listen to somebody that jumps out in their face and yells at them and calls them a shitlord and says nasty things to them and says nasty things to them about themselves. But they're quite interested in listening when somebody has something reasonable and rational to say, and their sign points out something that makes sense, and their catchphrases and their slogans are not rude and obnoxious, and they're not calling anybody names, and they just have something that you can take home and read and think about it on your own time.
Yeah. That's really what it was. And one of the groups of people who were there at that event that we really made sure to, they were the only individuals that we approached ourselves. And I approached them very, very subtly. And I just said, I tapped one of them on the shoulder and I said, here's something that you might want to read later when you get home. Right. And, it was because our camera guy, who was not obviously part of the group, right? He was sort of mingling in amongst the crowd, and he was asking questions of the attendees, and, you know, why are you here? You know, what do you think about all of this? Blah, 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 right? Well, these were a bunch of high school boys in their football uniforms from, I think, 3 different schools. And they were there. It was mandatory. Their coaches had told them that if they did not attend this event, put on high heels and walk a mile, walk all those laps around Oliver Square, Sir Oliver Square, they would be benched for the next 2 weeks. So they were there under duress. They were there as a mandatory part of whatever kind of citizenship program or requirements of the school, right? That their coach had decided this is what we're going to do as part of this requirement. And we were like, okay, so none of them really looked particularly comfortable being there. They didn't look particularly comfortable in the stiletto heels. And they were there, you know, in their football uniforms with their helmets, everything. And it was just like, that was just a little, I actually went up and I approached a few of them, and, you know, from the different, at least one from each school. And I said, give this a read when you get home, right? And I was told by an organizer that I was being too obtrusive.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
Of course, you can't have your own. You can't have your own space. This is something that, you know, to take it back to the hashtag thing, and thinking about this, nothing really is accomplished by having a bunch of guys walk down the street in high heels. This is very similar to the criticism I have of this situation. Not that I'm, you know, minimizing what happened. Now there is some ways in which I will minimize it, and that's why my opening line was what it was. Like I've said in a couple of other podcasts here, if you are trying to refuse something and it's forced on you, and then the person who forced it on you uses wealth and political power to prevent you from having legal recourse, that's one thing. It's another thing entirely if you do something stupid and you trade something hoping to get something for it, and you don't get the thing that you wanted. That is not the same situation. You know, and the actress who described Weinstein shoving her up against the wall and raping her, and who made that into a scene in a movie to sort of deal with her experience. And the woman who had the tape of Weinstein refused to take no for an answer from her, and, you know, threatening, don't call me again, like you'll never work again, you know, that kind of thing. That is a different story from accepting, oh, hey, why don't you come up to my office at 10 o'clock at night for an interview, and then going up there, which is stupid thing number one. And then once you get up there, it's totally inappropriate behavior for an interview. It's totally unprofessional and lewd and obnoxious. And you're like, okay, this is weird. That should be your second red flag if you get past the first red flag, and you should leave. And a lot of women did. There were stories that came out clear back in the 80s about women leaving Toback's office because of behavior like that. But there were women that went through his whole spiel and his whole behavioral shit, basically, and then got mad because they didn't get the job, and then complained. And I'm sorry, but that is not a sexual assault. That is you participating in something because you think you're going to get something for it, and then getting mad and calling it assault because you didn't get what you expected to get. And that's an entirely different story. And I like that.
That's not it's not rape. It's not even theft. It's fraud. It's like dine and dash.
It's not even
right?
fraud, because it's a job interview, right? I have been to job interviews and not gotten the job.
Well, yes,
and I get dressed up in professional clothing that suits that particular type of job. Like if I'm interviewing for something more professional, less professional, right? And I don't get the job. That's not fraud when they don't give me the job.
Yeah, no, but it is fraud if they tell you, if you suck my dick, I'll give you a job.
Yeah, but I don't think it's ever been quite that
It's
blatant.
never that explicit.
And
no. It's like the $50 sticking out of the wallet, you know, when you're, can I see your license and registration? And
here, I'll give you a real good.
Steve Buscemi just hands his wallet over with the money sticking out and says, "I thought we could maybe take care of this right here in Brainerd."
Yeah,
right?
I have an example for you that has no sexual nature to it whatsoever. I signed up with, when I was having trouble finding a job at one point, I signed up with one of those temp agencies that there are a lot of factories in this area. I don't know if this is common everywhere, but there's a lot of factories in this area that they don't hire off the street. They go through these temp agencies, and you get a job there for 30 days, and then if they like you, they keep you for another 30 days, and if they like you enough to keep you for a third 30 days, after that third 30 days, they get to decide whether they want to offer you a position or whether, you know, they want to let you go. And so I sign up with this, and they send me to a local automotive plant. And I am told in the orientation for this, everybody goes through this orientation, right? And they do not tell you that the orientation is not in preparation for getting a job. They just tell you, you can't get hired on to this plant without going through this orientation. And then in the orientation, they tell you, you cannot work here even as a temp unless you buy steel-toed boots. So I went out and spent, you know, I think it was like 60 or 70 bucks on steel-toed boots. I lived in a small community. There was one store in the whole community that sold steel-toed boots. They did not have women's steel-toed boots. They only had men's steel-toed boots, which was fine for me because I kind of have men's feet, even though the rest of me is female. But I bought the boots. I did the orientation. Never, ever got a call back from that place because it was so far ahead in its orientations that they would have had to go through like 150, 200 people before they even got to me on the order of, you know, the hiring people. Now, it wasn't fraud for them to tell me that I couldn't get in without the boots. It wasn't fraud for them to tell me that I couldn't get in without orientation. And it wasn't fraud for them to not tell me that there wasn't a job waiting at the end of that. And I ended up with, I had these steel-toed boots for a couple of years before I found somebody else with feet the same size as me that could wear them. And I ended up working somewhere else entirely. I didn't even get a job through the temp agency. And this is the kind of thing that happens with every job. It's not just Hollywood. It's not just acting. It's not just modeling. And it does happen with modeling too. Even at the artist model end of it, where people like me who don't have the guts to stand up in front of everybody and model work. But in any case, so it's not fraud. It's not an attack. It's your job to be savvy. It is not your employer's job. Now, I'm not going to say that Toback's behavior was okay, was great. You know, no, it wasn't. It was stupid. And it looked like, from what I've been reading about him, it looked like it was dysfunction that may have stemmed from him being abused as a kid by an adult woman. Because in the one article that I read, he told the women who complained about him, according to their stories, he told them he started having sex with older women at the age of 12. So that tells me something right there. But at the other end of it, as an adult in an environment that is rough and difficult and not cut out to coddle you, And that being the job search environment overall, and in particular in the entertainment field. It is your job. It is part of your job to be savvy. The same as if you became a cop, the same as if you became a soldier, the same as if you became a fireman. Nobody's going to sue a house because when they went in and the house was on fire, they got burned and there was smoke and they tripped over stuff. Nobody's going to sue the general public because when they became a cop and they were dealing with criminals, you know, one of the criminals said something rude to them. Soldiers don't go suing the public or the government because when they were overseas in a war, somebody shot at them. You know, that there are fail-safes in place. There are things that you get back for those situations. You get compensation if you are injured. And unfortunately, soldiers do not get enough. But the idea that it's not your responsibility to ensure your safety and your awareness and your protect your interests in the workplace is bullshit. And then every single one of these women walked out of that situation and did not seek legal assistance of any kind. They walked out of that situation, didn't go get a lawyer, didn't get a hold of the Equal Opportunity Commission, didn't get a hold of anybody except a journalist, or go start a Twitter hashtag, or go, you know, tell some reporter somewhere that wasn't going to report on the story because these guys own them. That's not protecting yourself. It's not defending yourself. It's nuts.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go on.
Oh, you I can't hear what you're saying if you were saying something there.
Oh, I said to go on. Go ahead.
Okay. All I was gonna say is, yeah, like this whole Twitter hashtag campaign is pointless. Like, what you should be doing is pushing for people to, like, go to the police when something like this happens, or, you know, go to the higher ups in whatever company that you're in. Stop wasting time just saying, oh no, this terrible thing happened to me. Go and try and do something about it. Like, otherwise it's just going to keep happening. We need to push for reforms, like you said in the intro video. Maybe we should allow recordings of these kinds of skeevy interviews, because, like you said, it's not rape if you acquiesce to doing something because they promise that they're going to give you a job after. It's not rape. Like, it's still skeevy, though, so you can still try and get a recording if it were legal.
Oh, yeah.
And then be able to say, like,
yeah,
hey,
offering somebody something is as a bribe.
Yeah. And you could still get that on recording if that were legal, and then you could say, look, this guy is doing sketchy things. Maybe we shouldn't be letting this guy run these interviews. Just saying.
Well, one of the things that annoys me so much about Weinstein, right, is that every single one of those women who decided to opt for money and a non-disclosure agreement, right, they were engaging in the cover-up every bit as much as anybody else. And that level of money, $100,000, $200,000, whatever it is, that's not punitive to a guy like Weinstein. That's not justice. That's not money. It's kind of the reason why in some of the Scandinavian countries and some of the European countries, when you get a speeding ticket, the fine is actually on a sliding scale according to your income, because the fine is supposed to be punitive, right? And if you have a yearly income of $5 million, a $180 speeding ticket is not going to be punitive. But if you have a yearly income of $30,000, you know, a $40 speeding ticket is going to be plenty punitive enough, right? So those guys with those massively huge incomes, they end up, when they get caught speeding, they end up paying like tons and tons and tons of money in fines, right? And that's because the fine is supposed to be a punishment. Now, a prison sentence is supposed to be a punishment, and one would expect that, you know, for somebody like Weinstein, for somebody in his position, any prison sentence, 2 months in prison would be a significant punishment. It's certainly more what he would ever expect to get. But when it comes to money, and all he needs to do is write a check, and she can't talk about any of it ever again. She's sworn an affidavit to the effect that the incident never happened, right? So she's perjured herself, and so she's highly unlikely to testify if there ever would possibly be a criminal case, because she would have to admit that she perjured herself and open herself up to consequences of that. You know, like, these women, nobody's looking at how these women and their choices after what they claim were incidents of sexual assault, sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, what they chose to do with that, how that impacted the ability of him to cover all of this up, right? And the ability of him to continue to do the same thing to other women, right? So I'm sorry, but I have those women sold other women down the river, right? And I'm just gonna say, I'm just gonna quote Madeleine Albright: "There's a special place in hell for women who refuse to help other women," right? Well, those women chose money, probably more money than they'd ever seen in one place, but certainly not enough to put a dent in Weinstein's wallet, right? They chose that over helping their women.
Yeah, that is something that I pointed that out a couple of times during the Twitter storm on this. And this is something that this really blows my mind. I mean, there's some potential arguments here. I had it repeated back to me a couple of times that there were women who did that for the same reason that Corey Feldman has not named names, and that was that Weinstein's money and power, his ability to control whether or not prosecution would take place, and the libel and slander laws being the way they are, put them in a position where that was their only choice. Okay, and I can accept that that could be true, but if it is, that makes it all the more important for their activism not to revolve around talking about just themselves and getting other women to come out and tell their stories and all that, but to fight for legal reform and for fail-safes or legal stipulations that would prevent him and other people like him from being able to control the cops, from being able to control the prosecutors, from being able to control the judges, from being able to control the media. That is what needs to be attacked. And I'm not the only one that's made this point. I today read the Toy Soldiers had a post when #MeToo becomes #NotYou. And one of the things that he mentioned in the post was the irony of the Me Too hashtag. What he says is, as is true with most feminist-driven hashtags, it was only a matter of time before the Me Too hashtag became an attack on men. The hashtag gained prominence after Alyssa Milano tweeted using it. The hashtag went viral, although given how political Twitter has become, it is possible that those running Twitter simply boosted the hashtag to the top of the list, which I watched it become viral, and I will say when it first became viral, there weren't actually a lot of tweets to it until after it became viral. But going on, he says, regardless of that, the hashtag prompted numerous women to write about their experiences of harassment and sexual violence. There is nothing inherently wrong with this. What makes it peculiar is that this comes in the wake of the Harvey Weinstein fallout. One would think the focus would center on the people Weinstein and other powerful Hollywood moguls abused. Instead, the focus shifted to talking about random instances of butt grabbing and catcalling, which, in my opinion, reading this reminded me of how much nothing this accomplished. I mean, they literally descended into squabbling. It wasn't even something that you could just say, this is nothing, this is not. It was nothing. All they had was a lot of people posting stories that were unfalsifiable, and yelling at people for posting stories that were unfalsifiable, that weren't approved by the feminist, attitude, feminist narrative. And
it didn't fit the paradigm. Yeah.
And as he talks about this, if you read the article, and again, I'm going to point out, it's Toy Soldiers. The blog is Toy Soldiers. It's toysoldiers.wordpress.com, and the article is when #MeToo becomes #NotYou. And I think I put it in the Patreon post. I put a link to it in the Patreon post. But one of the things that he pointed out is that one of the effects of this is that the infighting and the demonization of men, and the posts, the sort of, light post, the harassment light post. Somebody yelled at me from across the street when I was walking one night, and I got scared, that kind of thing. Ended up trivializing the issue. Ended up overshadowing the very thing that Milano was trying to bring about, which was people understanding that this happens a lot to people. And when you expand it out from rape to all forms of sexual violence and anything that is perceived as harassment, well, yeah, it does happen a lot. But I'm going to read a couple more. I got a couple more
super chats. Don't call them Snapchats.
No, nobody's snapping at us so far. Xeranx gave us $5 and said, I saw something on Twitter that said Corey Feldman gave names to cops in 1993 when he was about 22 years old. If I find the tweet, I'll send it. And Samurai Squirrel gave us $20 and said, Karen, have you read Reflections of Eden by, I believe that's by Rudy Gladicus, a colleague of, it might be Beirut, or Beirut.
Thanks for the $20. That's really awesome.
That is an excellent.
I have not read that.
Says orangutans are remarkably like humans, but more dimorphic. I'd love to be and reconnected.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we got to work with what we got. It should go back on. I'll keep the chat entertained in the meantime.
Oh, it's back up. It's back up. It's just, this is something that I've been dealing with since Spectrum bought out Time Warner Cable. Like we've never had interruptions of this nature in our service before, and all of a sudden we're having these interruptions. So I don't know why. But those are the two super chats that I saw. I think I got the whole thing. But as far as the chimp show, that is something that I want to see. I want us to do sometime in the future. Probably will not happen until after the court case. Okay, yeah, the chat makes it sound like, oh no, okay, they said it's back. They're seeing it's back. It's the lag. I cannot tell until somebody in the chat says it's back. But in any case, yeah, I definitely want to do an evening show of some sort where we have you, Karen, Allison, and Aiden talk about evolutionary psychology and monkeys and other primates, because this is something that we've got sort of a stark divide between people who really want to hear it and people who really don't care, and this will be a show for the people who really want to hear it. And I know you guys have a lot to talk about, and I could moderate because I don't know jack shit about this stuff, so I wouldn't have to talk much except for to make sure everybody else gets equal time to talk, or at least as much time as it takes to make your points.
Right.
But that all said, and that'll be an upcoming thing. We'll all have to get together and plan when to do that. And I wouldn't look for it to happen until after the end of November when we all go to court. If
it'll actually have to probably wait until January.
Yeah, and that's probably it's going to take us a couple of months to plan. There's a couple of things that are in the works that are going to be long range plans, and it's some of it is going to have to just wait until, like I said, the end of November when we all have to go to court, and to extend the Alice's Restaurant reference. I just love that we're going to court in the month of American Thanksgiving, and Alice's Restaurant takes place in the month of American Thanksgiving. We do not have to take 27 8x10 colored glossy pictures with circles and arrows and a paragraph on the back explaining what each one is to be used as evidence against us.
Well, there you go. But I'm just saying it'll probably have to wait until January because I have I've been inundated with interview requests over the last little while, and I'm chipping through those. And then I have I've been invited to some weird 16-day long violence against women event to present the other side of the gender violence issue. In Scotland.
Glad you clarified that,
and that's so.
16
I've got
days of violence against
on,
women.
Probably on the 25th. I've got to be in Vancouver to do something for Cafe. Then I've got the trial on the 28th, 29th, and 30th of November in Calgary, and then in the first 2 weeks of December, I'm maybe going to be going to Scotland. Then we got Christmas. I'm just not going to be around.
There you go, guys. Karen is so busy that she's too busy to be interviewed by Honey Badger Radio.
That's right. Why would I even talk to you people?
There we go. Well, at least Joey Jojo's talking to us. He gave us $5 and says, when most women complain about catcalling, they just mean undesirable men are talking to me. It's not catcalling when it's top 20 men. Well, there is that. There is also what I refer to it as humble bragging. There are women who complain about catcalling to make themselves look attractive. There are women who accuse men of staring at them who haven't even looked in their direction once the entire night because, oh my gosh, my butt is so hot that guy just can't keep his eyes off of it.
That's right.
That's a thing. And it's an annoying as hell thing. Just try going out with a group of women and having one of those women in the group that acts all paranoid about all of the men around her. Not because she is, but because she wants you to think she's attractive. And she's usually not.
I just remember that one hangout. It was ages ago. It was just after Elevator Gate. And who was it? Not Michelle, Jen McCrite and Rebecca Watson. And what's his name, PZ Myers, right? We're all doing a hangout together, and Rebecca Watson was talking about, she essentially opened the conversation with like, oh my God, I get catcalled so much. I get like harassed on the street so much. It's like, I'm just walking down the street minding my own business, and like there's guys who are like coming up to me and getting in my face and going, yo, 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 baby, how you doing, right? And it was very ethnic, her impression of what she gets, right? Very, very, very men of color-ish, which was interesting. And then Jen chimes in, oh, yeah, me too. You know, like I can't even go out on my front porch to collect my morning paper without getting catcalled. Like it's not like it, but they were like seriously one-upping each other. Oh, yeah. Oh, really? You too? Oh, me too. You know, like I am so unbelievably attractive that men seriously drive by my house just to see if they can catch a glimpse of me working in my yard. Right. And it's just like, oh my God. Right. Ladies, just like we can see what you're doing. Right. You're essentially escalating. You're like, oh, and that fish I caught was this big. Oh, yeah. You caught a fish that big. Well, this fish that I caught this one day was like this big. Right.
Yeah, and I'm exactly the opposite, man. I don't get catcalled very much. But by God, when I do, I get all the mileage out of it I can. I will turn around and shake my butt and smile and then keep right on walking. Because, you know, when it's not a constant thing, I don't know, if it was a constant thing, it probably wouldn't bother me either. But but the idea of bitching about it like that, you know, and
Yeah,
exaggerating it like that. It's just like, I have so much money, I don't know what to do with it, man.
yeah,
I've been storing
yeah.
it
That's what
in
it
my
is.
spare room in my mansion, and I'm starting to run out of space, and I just don't know what to do. This
I
is
light
just
my
such a
cigarette.
terrible
I roll
poor
it.
me, you know.
I
Yeah,
roll up my dollar bills, light them on fire, and light my cigarettes with them. But I still can't seem to blow through all this money.
yeah.
No, and I mean, like I
It's
told my
bull.
boss once recently. Well, I mean, I guess in the last 7 years or so. I told her because she was saying, you know, like I was talking about catcalling and the big deal that's being made out of it, and she said, you know, I got catcalled a few times when I was young, not very often, it wasn't a big deal. And I said, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then because she was in her 50s, I was in my 40s, I said, yeah. And then you hit a certain age, and some hobo with twigs in his beard tells you you're pretty, and you're like, yes, right? And it's like, and she just freaking burst out laughing, and she's like, absolutely, right? Um, because it's just, and it really is. This is in fact those two headlines side by side that Jessica Valenti, 1 year apart, she wrote two articles in the Guardian. One was about how catcalling needs to be eradicated, and then a year later it was like, I'm so freaking old that people don't catcall me anymore, and I hate that our patriarchal system makes me miss it, right? And it really is a question of a woman coming to terms with the fact that she's old enough that nobody's interested in her anymore. Nobody considers her worth catcalling or trying to hit on or whatever else. And so she's just like, and she misses it, and that humanizes her in my eyes, right? It's hypocritical as fuck, right, to say that, okay, I miss being catcalled because it's a sign that I'm no longer attractive to many men. But at least that's something like, it's a human emotion, it's a human response to that. She literally is saying, you know, in another 10 years, some hobo with twigs in his beard will tell me I'm pretty, and I'll be like, yes, and fist pumping all day.
Yeah, I don't feel sorry for her. And I really, as much as it might humanize, it also tells me there's a sense of entitlement there.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's, you know, I'm entitled to have you coddle my sense of self-worth, and to base my sense of self-worth on your coddling. And I,
Not
you
to
know,
mention
I'm the world's smallest violin is too big. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
My sense of self-worth is based on what I can do for other people, and how independent I could be of you know, needing help all the time and things like that. And I like, it's not that I wouldn't enjoy being attractive and and attracting people. It's just I don't have to have that, and it's not unimportant entirely, but it's not so important that it has to be the focus of my life. And I don't know, maybe that's part of the problem with this particular scene. I'm like gesturing from my laptop to my desktop computer where I have the article, like you guys can all see that. Um, but this particular scene with the hashtags, where these people that are posting about their experiences, um, particularly their experiences with what they consider street harassment. I would consider it street harassment if somebody came out of some area that I was walking through and followed me down the street and physically threatened to kick my ass or something for walking to work through their part of my neighborhood. or if, you know, somebody came along and said, "Hey, buy my stuff here, buy my drugs. Don't walk past. Come here, buy my. I told you you're gonna buy my drugs. Get over here, you know, or I'm gonna shoot you if you don't buy my drugs." I would consider that street harassment. I wouldn't consider it so much street harassment as walking past and somebody says something like, you know, "Hey baby," or "You look nice today," or even something crude that it turns out to be a compliment and just crudely worded. It's just not, I don't feel harassed by that. And maybe it's because of the neighborhood that I live in and because of the way I grew up and everything. But it's just, it's an alien thing to me to look at somebody going, "Oh, you're hot," and say, "Oh God, I feel so harassed."
Well, I'm pretty sure that I looked this up a while ago for one of my videos. Like, I thought harassment had to be like a multiple time thing. Like, it couldn't just be like a one-time incident, right? So
no,
to have somebody just drive past and say, "Hey, bitch,"
yeah, under the law,
harassment.
The legal term harassment means something entirely different from the way that it is used in common vernacular, which feminists are trying to change that.
Oh God.
And yeah, I know. But the legal term refers to a behavior that is repeated and intrusive and sustained. And so you're not being harassed if you volunteer to be someplace and then are offended by what's there. And you're not harassed if something happens to you once. You're harassed if the same entity does the same type of behavior or deliberately annoying behavior to you over and over again. And now the one thing that the legal definition has in common with feminists is that in the United States, currently, the legal definition relies on how the person feels about it. So if a behavior offends you and upsets you, it can be considered harassment. Whereas the same behavior that not offending and not upsetting another person would not be considered harassing that person. So if my neighbor decided to play, you know, the song "I Fucking Hate You" every time I walked out the door of my apartment because they hated me, and I was oversensitive to it, or I didn't like the loud music, or it just bugged me, that could be considered harassment. But if I really like that song, and I don't get that they're actually directing it at me, and they do it, it's a wasted effort, and it's also not legally considered harassment. So,
yeah, no, and I think too, I mean, like some of the things that they're trying to portray as harassment, you know, so any kind of unwanted advance, romantic advance, at least, you know, in terms of college codes of conduct and stuff like that, you know, any unwanted sexual communication, period, right? That is harassment. And what that definition does, number one, it does not put the man on notice as to what behaviors are within the code of conduct and which ones aren't, because he can't know if something is unwanted until he ventures to offer it and the person tells him that it's unwanted. But essentially, when you look at the affirmative consent rules, the man has to ask if is it okay if I kiss you? Is it okay if I touch you? Whatever. Now, if that communication is if he doesn't make that communication and get permission, then he's on the hook for sexual assault. But if he does make the communication and the communication itself was unwanted, then he's on the hook for harassment.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that you gotta kind of hand it to feminists. Their attacks on due process, on your civil rights, on the ability of the sexes to communicate, on men's ability to exist, have been very sneaky. They've gotten us to the point where there's a portion of society willing to accept their arguments on this, despite the position that puts men in. And that portion of society includes men. That's crazy. But getting back to the hashtag issue, that's being used to support arguments like this. The idea that a woman should be able to walk down the street and never feel accosted, even if she's the twitchy, oversensitive type that thinks if you smile at her and say good morning, that you're propositioning her for sex. And that's all right. But turn it around, and here you have an entire group of feminists coming down on men for talking about the same experiences. And, well, with women, we're supposed to have sympathy even for that woman who is just absolutely traumatized because somebody said hello to her in the morning. We're supposed to have as much sympathy for her as the woman who got shoved against the wall and raped and then had no recourse because the guy that did it had money and power and was able to prevent law enforcement from acting on her report. You know, but no sympathy at all for the guy who is held down and raped, or threatened with, I'll say you hit me, or threatened with, I'll say you raped me, or drugged, or was molested as a child, and couldn't report because nobody took him seriously because he's a guy, or because his perpetrator was female.
Yeah, that's really the problem with these kinds of campaigns, because they don't really accomplish, bringing attention to these things, because so many people just wind up using it for the most trivial of things. And they're not actually using their time to try and advocate for things that would actually make a difference, like legal reform, maybe a code of ethics being set up in Hollywood, because they're pretty lax on a lot of stuff down there, from what I've heard. Maybe a code of ethics might help them to get things under control. Just anything other than just saying, yeah, me too, I had a guy try and talk to me in an elevator once and I felt uncomfortable because it was like the CN Tower or something,
Well, I mean, I think feminists are trying to bring about legal reforms, and I'd put the reforms, the word reform in scare quotes there. I mean, they're certainly trying in Canada, but they're not trying to reform things in such a way that it would prevent sexual assaults, that it would prevent any of this stuff. It's just a matter of them trying to make it easier and easier and easier to convict men, innocent or guilty.
Of course, listen and believe, right?
Because, honestly, if, like, Bill C-51, I'm not going to get into the details of that here and now, but Bill C-51, if it had been in place during the Jian Ghomeshi trial, he would have been convicted. And that would have been a miscarriage of justice, in my opinion. After having seen the trial and how it played out, and exactly what the circumstances were, and that all three women were willing to mislead the court, intentionally mislead the court, in order to essentially nail this guy who had romantically rejected them. The fact that they would have been shown all of the exculpatory evidence that undermined their testimony. They would have been shown that in a pretrial closed hearing, and that evidence would have been subjected to rape shield tests, and that it would all have been shown not just to the prosecutor, but to the complainant and her attorney. And then the complainant would have been able to alter her testimony on the stand. And one of the things that the judge noted in his arguments regarding his decision was that, or his reasons, was that none of the behavior of the complainants following the sexual assault, even the more than 1 year on the part of Lucy Ducoteur of romantically pursuing Jian Ghomeshi, pursuing a sexual and romantic relationship with him, texting him, sending him love letters, sending him dirty pictures, sending him, dirty texts, all of that stuff, right? None of that, the judge said, none of that impacted his decision to acquit. because according to the training that he received by feminists, actual genuine victims of sexual assault often behave in counterintuitive ways. They often do things that we wouldn't necessarily understand, like pursue a romantic relationship with the guy for 12 months while he gives them the brush off over and over and over again. And he said he didn't even consider them lying on the stand or misleading the court to be a reason to acquit in and of itself, right? It's just because they lied on the stand doesn't mean that they were lying about the assault itself. Okay? This is what he said, right? The only reason that he could not convict, that he had to acquit, was because their testimony was unreliable, and that was all the prosecution had, was complainant testimony. That was the only evidence the prosecution brought, right? And the defense brought a whole bunch of physical evidence, and none of the physical evidence agreed with the complainant testimony. And so essentially it was a matter of credibility on the stand, right? In terms of, he even said, I'm not saying the sexual assault didn't happen. I'm not saying that the complainants were lying about what had happened to them, but I cannot convict a guy based on testimony that has been so significantly undermined. And so he's acquitted. So that was the only reason he got away with it, or got away with it, was acquitted. That was the only reason he was acquitted. And that would have been, all of that evidence would have been shown to Lucy Ducoteur and the other complainants prior to the trial, if this law had been passed by then. And this woman who repeatedly perjured herself on the stand and is facing no penalties or consequences for that whatsoever. She would have just altered her testimony to comply with it. Oh, I don't know what I was thinking, I was just trying to recontextualize the horrific event the horrific thing that happened to me. And I guess I just felt like if I had a relationship with him, it would actually make it almost like the assault didn't actually happen. She would have said something like that, right? The judge would have bought it, and Ghomeshi would have been acquitted.
And that type of thing actually happened in the 7 Years in Hell case. The woman who was making the accusations, one of the accusations she made, like her accusations ranged from the most frivolous thing you could think of to flat out rape. And in her rape accusation, by the time she made that accusation, we were tracking his every move, because we had figured out he needed to be able to prove where he was and what he was doing. And so he actually had a receipt from where he was and the place he had been. He was able to go back to them, and they had footage of him being there, and the person who waited on him remembered him being there at that date and time. So she changed her story. Well, I remembered it at the wrong day and the wrong time. Turned out it was another day and time when he had been somewhere other than home. So he had another receipt. He was able to nail where he had been at the time. He could go back to that place. Do you have security footage? Yes, they had security footage too. Most public businesses, if they're open to the public and they deal in any kind of cash exchange, they got security footage. So every place that he had been, there was film of him in there. And so it was very difficult for her to pick a time and a place and say, yeah, he was here at this time and did this thing, without him being able to prove where he was and what he was doing. And it was after that we started actually taking shifts of, our hangout time with him became almost babysitting. Like, this is a friend you're hanging out with anyway, but we're going to schedule our hangout time so he's never alone, so that he's always got a credible witness, so that any of the times that he's not someplace with a camera, there's somebody who knows where he was and what he was doing, who can walk into court and with credibility, which is important, testify to his whereabouts. And you shouldn't really have to do that. But in this situation, with this with the stuff that feminists have gotten into place, you do. And honestly, the situation with Weinstein and the other Hollywood moguls that are getting outed as abusers, some of that is going to come back on the women of Hollywood, because they're going to not be able to enter evidence that they should be able to enter. They're not going to have evidence that they should have, because they have worked so hard in California to make sure that if a defendant in a sex crime case can't prove his innocence, they're going to make it difficult to prove his guilt. And, you know, they've got a double standard on that as well. The other thing that I wanted to talk about with respect to this was their reaction to hashtag them too. That just blew my mind. And it's not that I thought that feminists were right when they said that women were more nurturing than men or anything like that, because I know better than that. I grew up around very nurturing men, and men and women nurture differently, but both sexes are very nurturing, caring towards children. And I think the majority of people are very protective of children. If you see something happening that involves a child, and it looks like the child is being harmed or the child is in danger, most people's first instinct is to do something about it, to care what's happening to the child, to contact law enforcement, to put a stop to the situation if it's imminently dangerous. You know, you see a child wandering alone in the store, your first instinct is to get somebody to help the child. You know, obviously, if you're a guy, you have to take the precaution of not getting close because other people might make a false accusation. But the truth is, most kids in that situation would be safer with a man because he is worried about that, and because people would be watching him, whereas a woman would be able to get away with something. And one example of that less nurturing and easier to get away with bad behavior, one example of that is this reaction that they had to this movie coming out, this documentary coming out for free. Now, an open secret, like I said, it's been out for 3 years. It came out in 2014. But this week, or this past week, because of the Weinstein scandal and all the other stuff coming out of Hollywood, they put it up so that anybody could see it for free. And I watched it, and it is gut-wrenching. And everybody should see this. This is something that everybody should know about. If you like going to movies and you care about the people who do the job to make them, it's very informative. It is, when you really let it hit you what they're talking about and who the victims were and what system was set up to victimize these kids, it'll rip your heart out. But it is very well described. It's very organized, very well put forth. It's not melodramatized. You know, it's just that the subject matter itself is, there's no nice way to put that. And I cannot even begin to describe how angry I was to see, like, I started trying to draw attention to it, the hashtag them too. I started tweeting it at some of the feminists that were tweeting to hashtag me too and tweeting to hashtag him though and all that. And their immediate response, at first it was silence. They didn't do anything. Then they started tweeting about the accusations that had been made during the Trump campaign, that all the information had come out, that the woman that accused him of groping her on the airplane, that the airplane didn't have armrests in it that lifted, that she said he lifted the armrest. You know, there was stuff like that that was like completely discredited the allegations. They start repeating all that stuff in that hashtag instead. And nobody, you know, of all of the people I tweeted it at, and all of the people that read their stuff, all of the people using hashtag me too, and all the people using hashtag him though, and all that, none of them moved over to talk about this issue of child rape, child molestation, child sexual assault in Hollywood. And it's like they didn't care. They didn't give a shit about the kids who have been put through this. And I mean, you think about this, an adult woman at least has the capacity in most situations to get up and walk out. You know, all of the complaints about Toback, those women can get up and walk out, you know, and they might be giving something up that they think they want, but they can get up and walk out. And
yeah,
they know where they can go to complain. They know to go to the cops. They know to go to journalists. They know to go to the, you know, they should know to go to the Equal Opportunity Commission. They should know to go to an attorney and say, hey, I've been put through this illegal situation. A child has no resources that are not provided for him by the adults around him. He has no recourse. He has no one to turn to. He has no place to go, especially after a judge has legally emancipated him from his parents to send him to live with a stranger. And it just blows my mind. All of these people have this huge, massive complaint about the sexual corruption in Hollywood. And none of them see this as a place to start fighting for reform.
Well, they only care about themselves. Like, you can see it in the way they dismiss men's issues. It's not all that surprising to me that people who would do that to somebody else would also do that to children, because people like that have no empathy. It drives me bonkers.
Well, I was watching Corey Feldman on, what was it, The View, right, where Barbara Walters, she was getting quite upset by his allegations that he was bringing out, you know, as to what was going on in Hollywood. And she said to him, but you're destroying an entire industry or something like that, right? And like, she's literally saying, by you speaking out about this thing that happened to you, you are damaging an industry. You should feel bad.
That's horrible.
Yeah, no, it was very, very weird to see that. It was extremely bizarre. It was like probably one of the most bizarre reactions from anybody to anything that I have ever seen. Is this guy he's been talking. Corey Feldman's been talking about it for a while,
years.
And and he's talking about it on this daytime talk show, and she tells him, you know, what you're doing right now is damaging an industry. And my response to that would have been, I don't fucking care, right? Maybe it needs to be damaged.
Well, they've damaged themselves.
You know.
They have sabotaged themselves. They're so wrapped up in this is outright deviant behavior. Okay, I mean, there are things that are not deviant behavior. It's not deviant to pursue the opposite sex. It's not deviant for women to trade sex for power. It's not deviant for men to trade power for sex. That is kind of the norm. But this preying on setting children up, first of all, to be completely helpless, to be in a situation where they have no defense, and then preying on them is absolutely deviant behavior. That is absolutely deviant behavior.
You look at child actors, and, you know, like, we all hear the horror stories of all of these child actors who, you know, they end up robbing laundromats and, you know, and being addicted to drugs, and, you know, and all of this horrible, horrible outcomes for so many of them. And you you look at somebody like, I think it was Elijah Wood said that he felt extremely lucky that his parents were vigilant enough to keep him away from all of that. Right? All of that stuff that is set up to trap these kids, his parents kept him away from it. And I believe it was Elijah Wood.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so it never happened to him, but it was only because his parents understood that there were these problems and made an effort to protect him from the people who would exploit him.
And this is something that I don't think people understand what necessarily the fullness of what he's saying there. His parents ignored warnings that it would hurt his career. I guarantee you they ignored warnings that it would hurt his career if they were vigilant. Because there were one of the ways in which parents were persuaded to let their boys go live with their manager was that they were told, this is how things are done in Hollywood. This is the only way your son is going to have the fullest opportunity to find work. And parents who lived far away from California, or who simply couldn't be there, simply couldn't be stage parents because they had to work and things like that, bought that. And it's not to shame the parents. I'm sure everybody thinks professionals, you know, well, not everybody, but large numbers of people just think professionals, a professional told me this, it must be true. This is how circumcision became common in the United States. A professional told me this, it must be right. Obviously, if a professional said it's beneficial, right? And there's lots of people out there that their doctors said it's very important to do this, so they did it. There's lots of people out there that the child wants to be a model, the child wants to be a singer, the child wants to be an actor, the child is desperate to have this, and the professional is telling the parents, your child's dream depends on cutting the apron strings and letting your child pursue this goal. Part of that is let him come live with me. And the person seems credible. The person seems stable. The person is the head of the organization, you know, or one of the founders of the organization that exists to protect children from being exploited. It looks good. And it takes a very savvy parent. And you have to be, if you're going to be the parent of a child in this situation, you have to be the very savvy parent. And not to excuse the parents either. This is the same situation as if you're job hunting. It's your job to be savvy. It's your job to protect your children as a parent. But it is a situation where his parents should be commended for spotting this or seeing through this, and actually being vigilant. You know,
and one of the most remarkable things is he's consistently had a career ever since Radio Flyer. He has consistently had roles. He has consistently been, and I haven't heard of any massive drug scandals. He didn't pull a what's his name, Iron Man, you know, spend a bunch of time in prison for heroin. Like, none of that with Elijah Wood. He's had a consistent career all the way through. And
it's because he's a very talented young man.
He's a very talented young man, sure, but it's also because he didn't suffer any of the damage that comes along with being exploited in those ways, right. and having all of the fallout from that. That is what stops child actors from transitioning into adult actors, because they are going through, you know, they're abusing drugs, and they're acting out, and they have they're depressed, and they're angry, and they're lashing out, and they're being very difficult to get along with, and they're unreliable because of all of the emotional and psychological fallout from what's happened to them, and they end up losing their careers, even if they wanted to continue. So, and even if they were still talented, because a lot of them would still, I mean, it's not like talent is something that just goes away overnight. So
no, it definitely doesn't. And this is something else the research that I've posted about before, and there's links to it in. I did an article on the fact that in the United States, juvenile boys in juvenile detention centers report a high rate of victimization by female staff. In that article, I pointed out a few areas of research that talked about some of the dysfunction that is traced back to child sexual exploitation. And the drug thing is one of them. Kids who are sexually exploited during their youth have a much higher rate, a much higher likelihood of ending up with drug addiction, ending up committing suicide, ending up engaging in risky sexual behavior, promiscuity, ending up in all kinds of other trouble. They end up more likely to end up in trouble with the law. There's a whole set of dysfunction that comes out of this, and you see it in a lot of Hollywood kids. This coming out made me wonder very seriously about a lot of the Disney kids that have just exploded with dysfunction when they got to a certain age. And in the past there have been stories of abuse come out of Disney kids. Shoot, I can't think of her name. The girl from the Twin Cousins TV show.
Miley Cyrus?
What'd you say?
I said Miley Cyrus?
No.
No, are you talking about Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen?
No. This is like back in the 50s. She was identical cousins. I can't even remember the name of the freaking song, and I can't think of the name. The name of the show was her name.
Shirley Temple?
No, older than Shirley, or not older. Disney. She was Disney. Somebody will say it in the chat, and then I'll feel stupid for not thinking about it. But anyway, she had come out, and it wasn't Disney that was the problem. It was her managers, a married couple that abused her. Patty Duke, yes, somebody did say it in the chat. The Patty Duke show. Patty Duke was horribly abused.
Okay.
And she just that kind of thing has been going on. It was pretty obvious that it's been going on for a long time. Patty Duke wasn't a recent kid. Patty Duke was a kid when our parents were kids.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I also have a super chat, 2 super chats actually. Hoki Bukisa gave us $4.20, haha. And said, but you see, Hollywood is full of the correct men. And Destron 1201 gave us $5 and said Sargon did a video on child trafficking that touched on this. That doesn't surprise me. Sargon's pretty astute when it comes to what's in the news and what it traces back to. He seems to be able to. He's a good digger. So I will look that up. I will look for that.
Did you say? No. You mean digger or digger?
I was digger. D-I-G-G-E-R. You go
okay.
looking for information. Dig. Okay.
Dicker is a different thing. So.
No, that's a totally different thing. I haven't even met Sargon. I have no idea.
Dicker doesn't have... The word dicker doesn't have anything to do with dicks. It has to do with bargaining, haggling, trying to negotiate a price.
Imagine you might be good at that
video
too,
from Sargon.
If you're a good researcher, if you're good at digging stuff up, I mean, you would be good at haggling too, because you'd know all the information you need to do it. But
okay,
no, when you said dicker, I heard it as a different verb. In any case, yeah, that does sound like something important to watch.
I think I saw that. That was quite a good video, if I recall.
This is not a super chat, but Terry B01 just brought up an interesting point as well. Is this why Shia? How do you say his last name?
Shia LaBeouf?
Shia LaBeouf. I always want to say Boof. I don't know why. Shia LaBeouf is acting crazy. It's possible. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. Now, this is something else. I'm going to bring up the vampire syndrome. This is just like not every child molestation victim grows up to be a pedophile. Many of us grow up to be perfectly normal. and not every child molestation victim is going to go through a period of any crazy behavior. I wasn't exempt from that. I engaged in a lot of risky behavior when I was younger. I went very wild for a while, and it may very well trace back to that. And it's still you making your own decisions, but knowing that if you have a child under your care who experiences that trauma, that gives you something to like, oh, okay, my child has experienced this trauma, or this child under my care has experienced this trauma. I need to give this child support in learning to make good decisions, learning to value him or herself in a way that prevents him or herself from engaging in high risk behaviors. And, to teach the child that love is not a transaction, but it's a mutual care and consideration and compassion between people. You learn from what's happened to other kids, the dysfunction that's happened to other kids, how to support your child's recovery, or the child under your care's recovery. But that doesn't necessarily mean that every nut job out there was molested as a kid, or that every child who has been molested is going to become a nut job or a pedo.
I would like to say, okay, in terms of, oh my God, dog, stop whining. In terms of actors, okay, there's a reason why Tom Cruise and Mel Gibson were actually really, really good actors. Like, I mean, they're good in almost everything that they do. And it's because they're fucking nuts. Okay? And it may actually be that a little bit of borderline personality disorder and talent for acting go hand in hand. That might actually be a thing. I would love for a researcher to actually look into it. Talent for acting and borderline personality disorder, or cluster B disorders in general. So yeah, I would not guarantee. There's no way to guarantee that Shia LaBeouf was molested as part of this Hollywood thing that goes on, because he might just be generally pathologically insane. So, yeah.
Okay, we got another super chat from Destron1201, gave us another $2 and said it's titled The Reality of Child Trafficking Rings. So that must be in reference to the Sargon video. So the Sargon video is titled The Reality of Child Trafficking Rings. For anybody who wants to look it up and see it, I'm sure if you search that in the YouTube search bar, it'll come up. And this is something that, obviously for obvious reasons, I've been kind of following news about these things for quite a long time, and looking up information on this for quite a long time as well. And it's something that when you delve into it, be ready to see and read and hear things that are gonna make you sick. There's no getting around that. And be ready to angry. There's no getting around that either. And it's not bad to get angry about stuff like this. It means that you're a good person who is protective of kids. But because of that, if you do start looking into this, I recommend doing it in increments. When you get to a point where you start to get sick or you start to get angry from this, take some time and go do something else and come back to it, because you can make yourself actually sick. Like, you can actually put yourself in a state of mind that will make you more vulnerable to colds and flu and stuff like that, and you can be down for days. But at the same time, that shouldn't stop people from learning that this stuff is going on and looking into what can be done to put a stop to it, because it'll continue to happen until people do that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ways of stopping that would be judge is not emancipating youngsters from their parents and putting them in the under the guardianship of their freaking talent manager. I think that would be kind of a first step.
And can you imagine any other profession? Let's say newsboys, right? Oh, a judge needs to emancipate these 10-year-old boys to go live with the manager of the newspaper delivery section of the New York Times, so that they can go. No judge would do that. The judge would look at everyone involved and go, "What in the hell are you thinking?"
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not the situation.
the whole thing is just bizarre. Emancipation, in terms of that. Okay, so why can't the judge appoint a trained social worker to act as this child's guardian to be paid out of his paychecks? Like, why would that, like, this is what gets me, is that, like, okay, so your manager is now your guardian. Isn't that a conflict of interest? Because you're taking 15% on everything he earns, and if he earns more by offering his ass, then you're earning more, right? So yeah, the whole thing's fucked up.
And this is the type of thing that I was so upset about with respect to these hashtags. Here we had, this is star power, okay? You had Alyssa Milano, you had several different stars tweeting about this. You had a lot of people with check marks that I didn't know who they were, but other people seemed to, that had tens of thousands of followers. People with actual social media clout that could get people involved, that could have started a campaign to reform things like that. Could have started a campaign to reform California's recording laws. Could have started a campaign to look into the situation of why was Harvey Weinstein able to use a donation to a prosecuting attorney's campaign fund to get out of being prosecuted for a crime. These are things that actual real world activism could deal with. Go get the law changed. If the law is already in place, find out why it's not being enforced. Who is dropping the ball? What needs to be done about that person? And how can we prevent the ball from being dropped again? These are things that these people could have been doing. And instead, they start a hashtag to get a lot of people to say things online that can't be proved or disproved, that are going to disappear into the void. 2 months from now, nobody's going to give a shit about hashtag Me Too. 2 months from now, the media is going to be covering something else.
It's not even going to take that long.
This will... Sorry, go ahead, Prim.
It's already been, like, there's already so many people talking about it and, like, watering it down with their basically non-issues. And so already there's probably a lot of people who are just not caring about it. It's just passing right over their consciousness.
Well, one of the most damning things I think I heard was a feminist attorney who works closely with sexual assault victims and has an interest in sexual assault advocacy on CBC radio, defending non-disclosure agreements.
Yeah, that's horrible.
For women who sue. And it's like, like she says she doesn't like the sweeping non-disclosure agreement, the one that says that you can't disclose any details, right? And some of these non-disclosure agreements are so sweeping that you are not allowed to tell your spouse, you are not allowed to tell your therapist, even though spousal disclosure and therapeutic disclosure are supposed to be legally privileged. Some of these women sign non-disclosure agreements that deny them the ability to even disclose in those areas, right? And if it's discovered that they have disclosed, they have to pay all the money back and possibly fees and court costs and all kinds of other stuff, right? So what these women are signing away or were signing away was their right to talk about what happened to them, and to talk about it to pretty much anyone. And this woman is like, well, I'm a fan of the non-disclosure agreement. The non-disclosure agreement, that just says that you're not allowed to talk about, what the settlement was, what the parties admitted to, what the blah, 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 right? But it allows a woman who receives a lump sum of, say, $200,000, and people are wondering, where'd you get this money? And she can say, I am not allowed to talk about it, right? And it makes it easier for those women to say, I'm not allowed to talk about it, than to actually disclose what it was all about. And I'm like, okay, so what's to stop a woman who did not sign a non-disclosure agreement from saying to her snoopy aunt, right, I'm not allowed to talk about it? Why wouldn't she just say that, even if she hadn't signed anything saying she couldn't talk about it? Why wouldn't she, this is the hilarious thing about it, is you can say, I'm not allowed to talk about it, to, give the brush off to your curious relatives and friends. You can say that whether you've signed something to the effect or not. Like, I don't, why is this lawyer, who's supposedly an advocate for sexual assault victims, championing non-disclosure agreements? And it's just like, what, this is backwards.
The thing about this is, it's in an attorney's best interest to keep this going, basically. Any attorney, legally or financially speaking, it is in their best interest to not put a stop to this kind of thing, because they're going to make money either representing the accuser or representing the accused, and that they aren't going to care whether the accuser is telling the truth or lying. They aren't going to care whether the accused is guilty or innocent. In many, many, many cases, all the attorney cares about is how much money they make on the transaction. And that's why you're going to see these people who are prominent in the field that are also attorneys, that are like, oh, I'm an advocate, I'm a big advocate for sexual assault victims, and I'm an attorney. That should be a red flag. That person's money is dependent, that person's income is dependent on a continuing stream of sexual assault accusers. And it's...
Well, I mean, I must have really lucked out with the two lawyers that I've had to deal with in my life, because both of them, money was not their primary interest, and they both would send me the bills, and I would see anywhere from 10% to 30% redacted.
Yeah,
deducted
you will see
off
that
of the
with
bill,
some.
just out of the goodness of their hearts, right?
Yeah, that's a rare thing. That's a rare thing. You will see that with a few attorneys here and there, and
Yeah.
if you're fortunate, you get an attorney that is, the attorney with the heart of gold. But most of the time that I've run into and had to deal with attorneys for any reason, it's really been all about the money and the prestige. If even if it's a little bit of prestige, well, I just won this case. It doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong. It doesn't matter whether they won something good for a good person, or whether they just strong-armed an innocent person into submission. They won. Perry Mason is a rare bird, okay, in the real world.
Well, I would agree. I would agree.
And this is one of the reasons why it bugs the shit out of me that the majority of our legislators are lawyers. Everybody says, oh, but they're experts in law. No, they're experts at using the law to line their pockets. They're not. They're not just experts at law.
Maybe we Canadians are lucky then. I mean, we have a part-time ski instructor and substitute drama teacher as our prime minister, and He may be many things, but he's at least not a fucking lawyer.
No, but he is the guy. He is the stereotypical guy that everybody's wife cheats with. Sorry.
I know, and but on the other hand, okay, so he's the stereotypical guy. He's like the tennis pro, the ski instructor. He gets laid lots with other guys' wives, whatever. Maybe, maybe not, but I'm sure he's had plenty of offers. Okay. But on the other hand, he did elbow that woman in the tit once.
Oh, yeah.
So, I don't know. I got mixed feelings about him.
Yeah. But I will say, with respect to the non-disclosure thing, honestly, that's an area of law that is, if anything tells you that the people who practice law in general are predators, it's that. You have a contract in existence that is designed to cover up wrongdoing one way or another. Either you are covering up wrongdoing or you are rewarding wrongdoing with a lot of money. One way or the other. Either the accuser lied and they have the accused has no recourse but to pay, which makes the non-disclosure agreement blackmail, or the accuser is telling the truth and has no recourse and is accepting money as the only recourse that they have, or they're taking a payoff to stay silent and cover up for a crime. I mean, there is no good in that. And now I would say other types of non-disclosure agreements that are not with respect to something like that. Like, okay, I work for company X, and company X makes product Y, and there are proprietary things about product Y that no other company knows, and I know these things, but in order for me to have the right to know these things, I have to sign a non-disclosure agreement to not broadcast this to the world. This is what product Y is made of, so everybody can make it, right? That's fair. Yeah. That's fair. Yeah. But if they ask me to sign a non-disclosure agreement that I find out product Y causes cancer, and I'm not allowed to testify about
my company fudged the results. Yeah, right, my company fudged the testing, right?
So then if I go to, if the government takes them to court, or individuals take them to court, and they have all this evidence that product Y has substance Z in it, right? And substance Z is a carcinogen, I'm not allowed to then testify to that in court. If the non-disclosure agreement has that in it, and they're asking me to cover up for a wrongdoing, that should not be legal. It should not be legal to force someone to become party to your crime using a non-disclosure agreement. Period.
Agreed.
And that's an area of reform. That's an area of reform that could be being fought for by these big names. They could jump right on that. They could say, you know what? It should never be legal to make someone an accessory after the fact. It should never be illegal to stop someone from whistleblowing. It should never be illegal to prevent somebody from testifying in court about a crime.
So but no, it's hashtag me too.
Yeah, it's going to take people like us, who maybe we don't have quite as big of a voice, but it's going to take people like us demanding those changes. It's going to take people like us doing the research to find out what is legal and what is not legal and what needs to be changed. Because those guys are never going to do it. They don't give a shit. All they want is attention. And the last thing that I want to bring up, and I've had the little thing up, the picture up here in the screen for a little while. I figured I probably ought to spare you guys another round of the slideshow with the pancake boob chick. But this is another double standard, another example of it. And I'm going to keep harping on this because it is a gaping double standard, no pun intended, that not even once have Hollywood women, not even once have Hollywood feminists come out and said something needs to be done about this. Not even once have they come out and condemned Schumer's behavior. And what I've got here is a graphic created based on what Brock Turner admitted to in court and what Amy Schumer admitted to speaking to a women's event in a speech she made where she actually portrayed herself as the victim. Turner's
it was the guy who kept passing out when he was giving her oral sex, right?
Yes.
And she kept having to wake him up and make him start again. And she was the victim because that just wasn't the most perfect sexual experience in the world for her. Because he was so drunk, he was passing out while she was essentially pulling his head into her private parts.
Yeah. And the thing that bugs me the most about this is I'll draw people's attention to this in the course of discussions on sexual violence. And they will have brought up Brock Turner, or they'll bring up drunk intoxication facilitated rape, where someone is actually passed out, or where someone is so drunk that you know, they don't know what planet they're on. They don't know it's the 21st century, you know, that kind of drunk. And they'll look at this and they'll make excuses, you know, and it wasn't like she didn't admit to these things. You know, the one paragraph of her rant, her monologue, and let's see, this was at the Ms. Foundation for Women's Gloria Awards and Gala. Now, this was in 2014, if I remember right. And she goes to see this guy after he has called her. And that's a lot of people's excuse. Like, David Futrell's excuse was it was consensual because he called her to come over. She gets there, and she says, finally the door opens. It's Matt, but not really. He's there, but not really. His face is kind of distorted. His eyes seem like he can't focus on me. He's actually trying to see me from the side like a shark. In other words, he was so blind, stinking drunk, literally, that he couldn't see straight. She, in her diatribe, she talked about how he stank. She talked about him having whiskey dick. She talked about him passing out. You know, she mentioned all of these things. She admitted to noticing that he had become unconscious. She admitted to proceeding with sex with him during and after his unconsciousness. There hasn't even been any major protest over her behavior. Nothing. Not one word. I mean, radio silence from feminists, radio silence from Hollywood, nothing.
No, and she portrayed the whole thing as this was a night of really shitty sex for me, right? Can you imagine a guy who's like, so she invited me over, I got there, she was blind freaking drunk, she ended up passing out on the couch, I stuck my dick in her mouth and I manually jerked myself off in there, right? But that was some of the shittiest sex I think I've ever fucking had.
It just sounds so absurd when you say it that way.
Actually, in the 80s, you probably could have gotten. I mean, that was Andrew Dice Clay's whole bit, wasn't it?
Well, yeah,
but nobody actually
wasn't telling it
that
like
he
it
did
was.
That.
Yeah, he didn't treat it like a true story. This was told like a true story.
Like this is the thing. This is the thing. I mean, guys will talk. Guys will tell fish stories about sex, and I'm not using fish as a euphemism for stinky vagina. I'm using fish as a euphemism for guys who, you know, tell stories about the gigantic fish that got away, right? Okay. They will, you know, one of the things that I have noticed, because I have been privy to a lot of locker room talk, and one of the things about Trump and the whole grab him by the pussy thing is that for somebody like me, right, who grew up working class, who grew up in a, you know, lower to middle class neighborhood, surrounded by people who maybe didn't do so well financially, who worked in trades for the most part, and their kids, Okay. And, you know, just growing up in that kind of milieu, I guess, none of this kind of talk shocked me. Okay. But one of the things, and it is it is, I mean, it may seem classist for me to say that it is mostly men in those strata of the socioeconomic hierarchy or whatever, tradesmen, you know, welders, plumbers, whatever, who are more likely to engage in that kind of talk with each other. Okay, that may be, I guess, a stereotype, but it is my experience. But at the same time, okay, when any of these guys got any inkling that some of the really over-the-top stuff that the other guy was saying was actually real, you know, that it wasn't an exaggeration, it wasn't a game of yo mama, you know, yo mama this, yo mama that, one-upmanship, right? Let's take it way over the top and see who can tell the most outrageous freaking tall tale, right? When any of those guys got any inkling that actually happened, something like that, yeah, then it became a problem.
Yeah, that is actually kind of my experience too. I've always been the sort of the person that nobody notices is in the room, and so and I do that on purpose. So it's not like I'm not complaining. That's been a big help to me as a photojournalist with sports and stuff. But in any case, I have also always been, because of that, the person that people will talk about things in front of that they wouldn't necessarily talk about in front of girls normally. And I've seen that same thing, like, you know, at the moment a guy starts to sound like he is talking about having done something to a girl that other guys think is inappropriate behavior, that you know, they wouldn't want someone doing that to their sister, they wouldn't want someone doing that to their mother, that kind of thing. That all of a sudden there's tension in the room, and it's so there, you can see fists being drawn and everything if it's bad enough. The bravado goes away immediately too, and you get a lot of, I was just kidding, guys, I was just kidding, I wouldn't do anything like that, you know. And it's pretty interesting. But in any case, it doesn't seem to be the same way with women. In fact, I've seen the opposite. Um, there is always somebody who will speak up, usually in a situation with a group of women talking about doing different things, not necessarily doing sexual things, but what they can get out of guys seems to be more often the type of discussion. Oh, you know, make him work for it. You got to shop around, that kind of thing. But the minute a woman starts talking about, well, you can manipulate the system this way, you can use this rule that way, and everything, the number of women that I've seen speak up against it is much smaller. And sometimes I've been the only one in a room full of women going, no, he owes her. He cheated, so he should pay up, you know, or he owes her, he left, so he should pay up. And it's not even always, you know, he's left her in a bad situation, so he should pay up. No, sometimes it's just he hurt her feelings. He made her sad. He made her feel less valued than she should have felt. So he should pay up. He should be punished. Get your revenge. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. And it's tolerated. And it's kind of embarrassing to see, on one hand, whether there are women around or not. If a guy seriously says, I do bad things to girls, other guys will kick his ass. When a woman says, I do bad things to men, other women will cheer her on. It's embarrassing. It's upsetting. And it's scary when you're a woman who has a family, who has people you care about, which I would think would be most women, but apparently not.
It is very weird. I think that women don't men have this, and this is one of the things about the Me Too hashtag too, that struck me, was the whole, if you feel the need to preface with, as a father of a daughter, I feel that this is just outrageous, this behavior, right? Yeah, just keep it to yourself. How about as a human being, you're outraged. But okay, I think that's projection, because I think that for women, it really is, in large part, in general, only if something impacts their husband, their father, their brother, their son, right, that they actually are able to say, oh, fuck, that's an injustice. If it happens to some other guy that they don't know, right, that they're not in some kind of relationship with, whether it's a friendship or a family relationship or an intimate relationship, if something happens to some other random guy, I don't think that they have the ability to say, or as great an ability to say, as a mother of sons, or as a wife to a man, right? I find this treatment of men extremely disturbing, right? No. I think, and this is like, it seems like men have the greater ability to take their relationships with the women in their lives and project them out onto all women. And women have a lesser ability to do that. And somehow they're criticizing men for having this ability that women don't seem to demonstrate as often. So,
to express compassion, consideration, and concern for strangers by relating your connection with them to your connection with people you love is a normal human response. It is the height of compassion. It is saying, this stranger who I've never met before, I connect with this person so much as a human being that I can relate them in some way or another to somebody that I love and trust and want to be around. And it blows my mind that the people who criticized men for doing that couldn't see that. That is the depth of blindness right there. That is blindness to infinity. To be unable to see how human that is, how compassionate that is, and how connected that is to the people around you. Everyone is my loved one. Everyone has something in common with someone that I care very deeply about and would give my life to protect. That is just, it's outrageous that they can't see that. And it's amazing how many people have that in them.
It's outrageous that they can't see that, and not just that they can't see that that's what's going on, but that they think that it is the opposite of what it really is. That it is a man making it, yet again, men are making it all about themselves. Right? No. It's a man actually humanizing women to the degree that he humanizes his daughter.
They're making it about love and compassion and caring and consideration. They're making it about how to protect everyone that can possibly be protected. They're extending their circle of protection that every man has for his friends and his family, his closest folks. They're extending that out to the whole world. Maybe the reason that these women don't understand that is because women have that tendency to in-group and out-group people to such a degree that they develop a bias for their in-group, and they will tolerate wrongdoing within the in-group and ignore right that comes from outside, particularly with respect to their own sex. That's the only thing I can think of.
I don't know. Maybe. Oh God, who knows? That would be a whole nother show, I think.
It'd be an interesting thing to look into. But yeah, it is getting late. It is after 10 o'clock. We've gone long, and long and hard. I told you guys we were going in dry. And we did.
Long
We went
and
long
hard,
and hard.
long and hard.
Yep.
Oh my
And
God.
like a post horse. What is that? That I can't remember which of the Conan books that came from. That you'll be ridden like a post horse, and the female lead says, "How is a post horse ridden?" And he responds to her long and hard and with little rest in between. That's basically what you guys got tonight, right? Long and hard with little rest in between. But I'm gonna give you.
we have been ridden hard, and we need to be put away wet.
Yes. Well, before I put anyone away wet, I have some three more super chats. And I'm going back to the first one. I can't remember whether I already read this or not, so sorry if this is the second time reading it. But Joey Jojo gave us $5 and says, "Who will stop Dan get in the van Schneider? I would if I could." And that is, once again, what men do. I would stop him. I will stop him if I can. And yeah, that is a great super chat. Deadpool TY Interwebs gave us $5 and said, "Karen, please speak more on BPD if you can, so that men can be on the lookout. Still dealing with the fallout 2 years later. Advice for men." And I'm gonna say one thing about this. Look up a website called Shrink for Men. It's 4 with the number 4. That is Dr. Tara Palmatier's website, and she has written extensively about borderline personality disorder and other cluster B disorders and how they affect male-female relationships. Also look up on avoiceformen.com, do a search for In His Own Words. She has a column that talks about things that men have been through in relationships with abusive women. And there are some things there to look at, but we probably ought to do another show about cluster B women in relationships. I just have to find a time when she can come on the show. I had been trying to coordinate with her before, and her schedule is just so, it's like Karen's, it's so packed that she doesn't really have time to do one. The last super chat is French Honey Badger, gave us $5 and says, "I'd be surprised if a judge couldn't dismiss an NDA if it makes you an accessory to a crime already." And it's possible. It is quite possible that they can already do that. The area of reform then that would be needed would be to fight for them to start doing that, essentially, to start making it a precedent in court. Because once something like that becomes a precedent in court, it will become the rule. So with that, I have one last thing, which seems to have... Oh, great. My shill disappeared. I was going to shill... let me see if I can get it back. It's the same shill that I read in the last show. So repeat the last shill. No, here it is. It's coming up on my screen. This is awful. And I will apologize for that, but I'm dealing with old equipment, and we just have to deal with what we have to deal with. So, for the shill, now that YouTube is designating everything that its Google overlords deem politically incorrect and punishing in accordance with the rules of social justice, and I guarantee you guys they're going to deem this show politically incorrect, because not only did we go against the feminist narrative, we talked about specific people. Naming Amy Schumer's probably going to get this, you know, taken down. I wouldn't be surprised if YouTube ditches this. But if you don't want to wake up one morning and find yourself unable to find our content because YouTube finally dropped the axe on our channels for being politically incorrect, go to badgerfeed.com. Also, we're going to be moving to a digest format for podcasting, so if you're listening to this in audio format and you still want to be able to follow our uncut live streams, you will be able to find those at badgerfeed.com. If you want notifications regarding what we are doing, go to badgerfeed.com. So, in short, just go to badgerfeed.com. Just do it. And with that, I would like to thank my co-hosts and I would like to thank all of our listeners. And especially I want to thank Brian for being here the whole time, even though he didn't get to talk much, and being there in the background, making sure that everything runs okay, especially with me and my stupid, shitty internet. Thank you all, and good night.